Where do I start? At the beginning. Well, I don't think I'll go there because I don't think too many of you like that part, so I'll leave that out. Okay, let me start this way. I was brought up on Miami Beach, on South Beach. One of the last guys to hold out. I'm one of the last ones. But anyway, this is back in the 50s. And what happened was, my father's Jewish. Later come to find out there's Jewish blood in my mother's lineage as well. We just found that out recently. But at the time, in those days, it was not acceptable for a Jewish man to be hooked up with what they considered a Gentile woman at the time. So I was conceived out of wedlock, and they had whisked him away back up to Brooklyn, New York, is my understanding. And so I never got to meet my real father, and I never knew who my father really was. I grew up with my mother and my grandfather on South Beach, and my mother put me into Catholic school. And so for the first 21 years of my life, I was brought up as a Catholic. It's interesting in Scripture how it talks about how Yahweh will hide us in the nations, you know, and intermingle our seed with the seed of Gentiles so that you'll be hidden. Thus the lost sheep of the house of Israel. I didn't know any of that back then, and it wasn't until many years later that I started to make the connections. But what was interesting is that as I was growing up, I identified myself as a Catholic. And across the street from me came from New York a young Jewish boy about 2 years older than me, and we hit it off really, really well. We became the best of friends. We did everything together. We were inseparable. And what happened was that one day I had a Christian friend of mine that lived next door to him. And in those days there was a lot of anti-Semitism amongst Christians, at least in that area where I had lived. And I wasn't really quite aware of that until this one particular day when I went to go to see my Christian friend, and I knocked on the door, and the mother answered the door, and she says, before I let you play with my son, I need to know something. She says, you're friends with little Stevie next door, the Jewish boy, aren't you? I go, yes, ma'am. She says, well, I don't let my son play with Jewish boy. We don't like Jewish people. And therefore, if you're going to play with my son, you'll have to stop playing with little Stevie. And you have to play with my son. What was so weird about this moment, it was so surreal, because I was only 8 years old at the time. But at 8 years old, somehow Yahweh gave me the resolve in my mind to give an appropriate answer. And the answer was, I am sorry, madam, but my friend Steve is my friend, and I will always be friends with him. And I, as a Catholic, was giving up somebody similar to me in the faith, siding with a Jewish boy. And she goes, well, therefore, you can't play with my son anymore, and that's it. Don't let me ever see you around him. I said, okay. So I went over to my friend Stevie's, and we went out to play. I told him about it, and we stayed friends for several years. It didn't seem like much of importance at the time, at 8 years old. But then what happened was, I went to Catholic church one Sunday morning. I remember my mother always give me a quarter and a dime to put into the basket. And so she would never go to the church, but she sent me every Sunday. Ruined my Sundays, you know. So it's funny because on Sabbath, I would have to wait for my friend Stevie to come out of the shul, and I would be mad because he'd have to go to the shul on the Sabbath, and I didn't keep the Sabbath. I was a Catholic boy. So I'd have to sit around and wait for him to come home around noontime, and then we could go out and play. And then on Sunday, he would have to wait at home for me, you know, to come home from church about 11 o'clock in the morning. Then I could go out and play with him. So it was really kind of weird. But what would happen is I would go to the church, and when they passed the basket around, I put the quarter in, but the dime I kept in my pocket. Because on the way home every Sunday, there was a little gas station that had these old little coolers out front, and I loved my knee-high strawberry soda. And so for a dime, I bought myself, I never told my wife until I became an adult that I kept it 10 cents. But I did my mitzvot by putting the quarter in the box. But anyway, okay. So what happened was one Sunday, I was sitting in this church on Miami Beach. And the priests in them days were giving the Mass in Latin, so I didn't know what they were talking about. But I could tell you to this day exactly where I was sitting when this happened. As I was sitting there, I was watching the priest give the Mass, and a voice spoke to me. And it was none other than the Father, who I'd never heard from before. And he spoke to me, says, observe all that's going on. And I thought to myself, okay. And then he says, this is all nonsense. It's not for real. At 8 years old, he spoke to me. And it was quite shocking, but at the same exact moment, there was an inner conviction that this voice that spoke to me and told me this, it was absolutely true. You could take it to the bank. And at 8 years old, I knew this. I filed this away in the back of my mind. I didn't say anything to my mother or anybody because I wanted to be respectful to my mother, and I just kept going to the church because that was the thing to do, even though I didn't really felt like I got much out of it. But I filed it away in the back of my mind. Then I got to be about 21 years old, and one day my mother says to me, I need you to sit down. I need to talk to you. I said, okay. So I sat down. She goes, I want to tell you something, and I'm quite nervous about it, and I don't know if I really want to do it because I don't know how you're going to take it. I said, just spit it out. So what she said to me, she says, well, you never knew your real father. Quite frankly, all my years growing up, I never really thought about it that much in a strange kind of way. But anyway, she says, you never knew your father. I said, no, you never spoke about it. She says, well, I just want to tell you something, and it's probably going to come as a shock. I go, what's that? She says, your father is Jewish. Now, mind you, at the time, I'm still living as a Catholic, not practicing, but I was living as a Catholic. That was my identity. And then when she says that I was actually from Jewish descent, I was like, wow. I was kind of shocked, but kind of not shocked at the same time. It kind of just like was water off a duck's back. And so I said to my mother, I said, wow. I said, that's interesting. She goes, so what do you think about that? I go, I don't know. I guess I have time to absorb it, you know, because it's kind of a shock, but, you know, how does it really change my life? At this point in time, I'm a young 21-year-old guy. I'm out hunting females down and want to do the game that men do at that age, and it really didn't matter to me. But at the same time, when she told me that, I began to remember about these little events that I had just spoken about in my earlier life. And I'm like, that's really surreal. So it's kind of like a couple of dots got joined together, but it still got put on the back shelf. So then what happened was I became 26 years old, and then I saw my wife to be. My wife to be. And when I saw her, voice spoke to me again and said, that's the one. Now, I was not looking for a wife. I was just looking to have fun. But when I saw her, he said, that's the one. And I'm like, huh. So I pursued my wife, as I normally would any other female. That didn't work. And I tried for months, and she brushed me off and didn't want to have nothing to do with me. And I'm like, I know that this is the one, but how am I going to make her understand that she's the one? So one day Yahweh spoke to me after about 3 months of being turned down constantly. He said to me, this is a special one, and you're going to have to treat her very differently. And so I got that. Now, mind you, I'm still not a believer, but Yahweh's speaking to me, and He's giving me strategy, you know? So what happened was, one day, I came home from work very late. It was about 11 o'clock at night, and I lived in a penthouse at the top. I know what you're thinking. It's not the kind of penthouse where rich people live. It's just a little simple efficiency. But it was a penthouse, and I had a pool next to it, you know? So I was living high at the time. I was up on the top. But anyway, across from me was the laundry room, you know, for everybody to use in the apartment building. So I had to go do some clothes because I had none. So I ran over there to do some clothes, and who do I see? The wife to be. You got it, Tom. You're on your game. The wife to be standing there, and it's just the two of us. And when she saw me, she had panic in her eyes. So right away, I said to her, I said, are you going to be here? Are you going anywhere? She goes, no. I said, just wait here. I'll be back in a minute, you know. So right away, I later found out she thought I was going downstairs to get a joint so we can smoke some marijuana together. But I didn't do marijuana. I didn't drink. I didn't do drugs. I was really a pretty good guy, except for being a womanizer. I was a pretty good guy, you know. But she didn't know that. So she thought that that's what I was going to do. So she was panicking because she doesn't do that kind of stuff either. And we didn't know because we didn't talk to each other about that kind of stuff because she really wouldn't give me the time of the day. But anyway, what happened was I manufacture acrylic plastics. And at the time I was manufacturing these floral designs out of clear acrylic, and they were hand sculpted, very unique. You wouldn't find them anywhere. There's a few of them over here. And so I had made one specially for her. And so I put it behind my back and I went all the way up the elevator and up to the top floor where she was. And I was praying the whole time, I hope she's still there, and she didn't take off. But she was still there. And so I said, I've got something for you. Meanwhile, she's sweating because she's thinking I'm going to pull out a joint. Instead, I pull out this flower. And that was the defining moment. That was the moment where she melted and she accepted me. And she realized, I guess, she had pegged me wrong. I still tell her, you pegged me wrong. What's that song? How's that song go? You don't really know me. What's that name of that song? I sing you sometimes. I forget what it is. If you don't know me by now, you will never ever know me. Ooh. I sing that to her all the time because I pull a rabbit out of the hat on her every now and then, just to let her know that you still haven't figured me out. At least she pretends that she does. Anyway, so we started to date and so forth, and what happened was, shortly after that, I became very ill. I was always in great health, very active, but I became very ill. And I believe Yahweh had put her in my life to help me through this phase that I was about to go through. Little did I realize what the end result would be. And so what happened was, I had to have an operation, have my tonsils out. That was not a big deal. But then what happened after that was, I started to come down with a stomach condition that nobody was able to explain. And basically what would happen is, about 2 o'clock in the morning, like it was very punctual, it was a very strange thing, my stomach would start to convulse. And it would literally feel like there was an earthquake in your stomach. Your stomach would literally start to shake, is what would happen. And then I would go into like convulsions in my stomach. Severe acid, swelling. My stomach would swell out to about 3 times its normal size. It would cause me to be hunched over, and I'd be rolling in the bed all night long for 24 hours in so much agony and pain. It didn't matter what I took. Nothing would settle down. It's like once this thing started, it just would not stop. Well, what happened was, not to belabor this thing too long, month after month, this thing just kept hitting me, hitting me, hitting me. And then what happened is, it started to put me into a state of depression. It was not only just affecting me physically, but it was affecting me mentally and spiritually as well. Now, at this point, I still had not become a believer. I didn't pray for healing or anything. I just thought it was something that would eventually go away, but it didn't. And every 2.5, 3 weeks or so, this thing would hit me over and over and over again. Well, I went to specialists. They put me in the hospital. They ran dyes through me. They did all kinds of tests. They put hoses down in my stomach, pumped out my stomach, tested the fluid in there to see what that was. One time, to be a little bit comical, one time they wanted to do an upper-lower GI series on me. That's the barium stuff. One, you take a milkshake, it's disgusting. And the other one, they go up the backside. So I remember, it's a very humiliating time of my life. I had to sit on the table in the operating room. The guy had to put the enema inside me, and it had a little valve on it to let the barium go in, you know, to do the lower GI. Well, my body didn't like stuff going in. It only likes it going out. Terrible. I mean, the stuff I was going through was just like, But anyway, I got through that. Anyhow, they never found anything. The only thing they really found was that my blood cell count had gone up to 15,000 count, which they said is astronomical. They brought in all kinds of specialists in gastroenterology. They were threatening to cut me open during the middle of one of these episodes to see if they could figure out what's going on. Then they decided not to do it. So this went through about 1.5 years, I would say. By the time I got to the end of the 1.5 years, when I was at this point with the hospital, I had already gotten to the point where whatever had taken me over was destroying me from the inside out, physically, mentally, and spiritually, to the point that I basically didn't have much strength left. And I knew in my heart of hearts that there was going to come a moment when I was just going to die from the exhaustion. That's how bad it was. And I knew it internally. You know, I later come to find out, once I came to the faith, and I'll get to that in a minute, that I really had demonic activity going on in my life. Somehow, legally, demons had come into my body and they were afflicting me with this infirmity. I didn't understand that at the time. I had no understanding of that kind of stuff. But yet, there was a part of me that knew that there was something had come in and taken over. And the way I try to describe it to people, it's kind of like we're all sitting here right now having a good time. Everything's great. Everything's peaceful. And all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of rebels come barging through the front door with machine guns, and they tie us all up. And they bind us hand and foot, and they begin to assault us, and they demeanor us, and they just do everything to you to torment you, to the point that you can't break free and there's nothing you can do to free yourself from this. And so that's kind of how it felt for me. It's like something had invaded my body, took over my body, and took over my mind, and took over my will, to the point that I was powerless to break free of it. Okay, so I knew I had approximately 2 to 3 months to live, and I would just die from exhaustion during one of these episodes of these attacks. So a few weeks later, I had another attack. And what happened was, I had to urinate, and when I went to urinate in the toilet filled up this high full of bubbles. It would be like taking liquid soap and throwing it in the water and agitating it, and it was all bubbles coming up to the rim of the toilet. This is really freaky, the stuff that was happening to me. And I just really thought my life was over with at the time. Then after that, I had another attack, and I could feel my stomach starting to shake, and right away I went and I took Pepto-Bismol. Pepto-Bismol is supposed to settle your stomach down. So I took a little bit of Pepto-Bismol, and my stomach started to shake violently, and I could feel it. And all of a sudden I started feeling like this eruption of something in my stomach, and it was coming up, and bubbles were popping out of my mouth from my stomach. Acids and stuff were just bubbles were coming out of my mouth, and I was choking over this. And I'm like, this is crazy. I knew my time was really short at this point because it was just getting worse and worse. Then what happened was the specialist calls me into his office. I remember this was a Tuesday. And I go into his office, he sits me down, he says, John, he says, I've been dealing with your situation for 1.5 years now. We've tried everything that we know in medical practice to try to at least diagnose what you got. All the specialists that came in with me to help you in this situation all say they've never seen anything like this in their life. They have no clue as to what you got. Here's the bad news. I said, there's bad news? He goes, the bad news is, in my conscience, I cannot continue to take you as a patient. I go, but why? He says, because you can't go above me. There's nobody else that you can go to. I am up the highest that you can go in this area of the body. And we've never seen anything like this. We have no explanation for what's going on with you. And I feel terrible about taking your money, and I know I can't do anything for you. Wow, you talk about despair. You talk about the death sentence. You talk about the handwriting on the wall. This is it. The curtains are ready to close. You talk about dejection and hopelessness. That's where I was. So I went home, and I told Amanda about it. And I told her, I said, I'm going to go soon. It's coming. It's soon. Because I don't have the physical and mental capacity to fight this anymore. I'm totally wore out. I'm totally depressed. A lot of times what would happen is during the day I would leave my job, I had a full-time job at the time, and fortunately they were a little slow at the time. I can get away with it. But I'd be so depressed that I would just go punch out, and I'd go to where she worked. She worked in a travel agency. She was the only person in the office. And I'd go in the back office and I'd roll up on the floor like a baby and just sleep the afternoon away. I had no desire, no passion to live, no goals, no aspirations, nothing. All that was taken away from me. I was just an empty shell of a person. It was hard to motivate me to do anything. Quite frankly, it was amazing my wife even stayed with me, because I could only imagine what must have been running through her head, like, what in the world did I get involved with? My first instincts were correct. Stay away from this guy, you know? And I can understand that. But she stuck with me, and she would stay up with me all night long when I'd go through these convulsions. So moving forward, this was a Tuesday. I went to bed that night. Mind you, I was on a diet of boiled chicken and water, no salt, no pepper, nothing. Milk, that's it. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter what kind of a diet they put me on, I would still have these convulsions anyway. So then what happened was, went to bed that night. It was a Tuesday night. Woke up the next morning, somewhat normal. Had a normal day. Then that was Wednesday. Went to bed on Wednesday night. And when I was waking up the next morning on Thursday morning, just as you're coming in to that time frame when you're beginning to become conscious of the fact that this is a new day and it's time to get out of bed and go to work, you know, that twilight zone kind of thing. The voice, this same voice that spoke to me in times past, spoke to me this time and said to me simply in a very strong, authoritative, not an angry, but authoritative voice, today you are healed and you can go out and eat whatever you want. The conviction that I had with that voice, I knew that I was instantly healed. I got out of bed, there was no sign of inflammation, there was no sign of pain, there was no sign of discomfort or anything. And I was so convicted that I was healed that I went out that day and I had pizza and chili for lunch, which I hadn't been able to eat for a year and a half. And my stomach didn't have no problem. I was healed on the spot. Well, the interesting thing is never once did I ever cry out for deliverance. I resigned myself to the fact that I was going to die, and quite frankly, I was happy to die because it would mean I would end my misery and my wife could go on with her life and not have to be burdened with this guy who's got all these issues. Really, that's how I felt. And so what happened was now all of a sudden it's a different life. I'm alive, I'm well, I still had depression. The spiritual part was still there in part. The scarring of that was still there. That had to be worked out over the next 20 years. But in the next 2 weeks, one Sunday, I was sitting in front of the TV in the morning, which normally I don't do. I'm out fishing or diving or whatever I like to do at the time. But I was sitting there and I saw this elderly man come on the TV and he began to talk about the Sabbath and the feast days and stuff like that. You might remember him as Herbert W. Armstrong at that time. And he began to speak about this stuff. I'm like, you mean to tell me the Sabbath is not on Sunday, it's on Saturday? And it reminds me of my brother Anthony, who has a story about that as well. And I'm like, in that moment, it was another defining moment in my life. Because now all of these experiences that I had from the time I was 8 years old, it all started to make sense. I'm Jewish. I'm supposed to be keeping the Sabbath, and the Sabbath is on Saturday. All of a sudden, it was this epiphany that I had that, like, now I understand why all this makes sense. Well, you would think that I would have jumped up and down and I would have grabbed this thing and just ran with it. Not me. Even though I intellectually understood what had happened to me and I realized the significance of it, the problem is, it was going to interrupt my weekends. It was going to interrupt my fishing, my diving, and all the other things that I was so passionate about. And I wasn't about that. But in the meantime, what I did was I started writing for literature, and I started learning more and more about this stuff. And then Yahweh spoke to me that He wanted me to make the change. It's time now. After about a year studying, I had resolved in my mind, this is true. The Sabbath is true, the feast days are true, the kashrut, dietary laws, all this stuff that we know today, I had solidified in my mind that this was true. So there was no more excuse to hold back, but I still didn't want to do it. So I said to Yahweh, I said, you know what? Give me 1 year. Give me 1 year. I want to be able to go out and enjoy myself fishing and diving, the things that I want to do. Give me a year to get it out of my system and then I'll commit. So I went this next year. I went out my diving and my fishing and all this other stuff. And then after a year, little I realized a year had passed, I felt like somebody, like when you see one of these cowboys and they go and they get a wild horse, and that moment when they put the noose or the rope, the leash around the neck of the horse just submits. You know, he's been captured by this cowboy and now he's owned by the cowboy and he doesn't resist and fight anymore. It's kind of like that, if I could paint it that way. And so it felt like a leash was put around my neck and gently was snugged up. Not choking, but snugged up. And He spoke to me again and He says, I gave you your year. Time is up. you're coming with me. And I knew in that moment there was no more putting it off. There was something about that experience that told me that if I resisted it again, this stomach condition would probably start all over again. He didn't tell me that, but there was something in my spirit that just came to that conclusion based upon the significance and what Yahweh was doing at that time. I didn't know him as Yahweh. I didn't even know his name. Just knew him as God, as most people know him. So I started studying and delving. I gave up my diving and my fishing. Well, actually, sometimes I did it if I just went out on Sunday. But now I started to observe the Sabbath. Started to grow into it and so forth. Then a couple years later, I got baptized. And that just set off a whole new testimony that I really don't have time for this. My whole point with this here was simply to show my background, where I came from, and where I got to at that point in my life. So hopefully that benefited you as it did benefit me. It was a great experience, and it just goes to show me that as a metaphor, when we go through this life, there are a lot of things that happen to us that play a part in an event that's going to happen yet future, but we just don't know the end from the beginning. And so we have to just trust that Yahweh is going to have our best interest in mind. Go with the flow. Don't fight it. Allow Him the privilege to lead you into circumstances that are beyond your understanding at the moment, but later, with patience and with faith, allowing Him to work His work through you, you will see the end result and you will see the fruit of that. So that's been my mantra in growing up in this faith, is to stop resisting what Yahweh is doing and just let Him have His way, because it all does mean something, and you will discover it in time.